Over 22 million people have now seen the exact moment Jasmine Crockett faced off against Nancy Mace during a brutal congressional hearing on white privilege. It wasn't just political theater, it turned personal when Mace looked Jasmine dead in the eye and said, "You people are always causing trouble." The room froze. Crockett didn't yell. She dismantled her, one calm, devastating sentence at a time. Because when a congresswoman says, "You people," on national television, you have to ask yourself, who gets to be "we" in America, and who doesn't? More importantly, what happens when someone finally dares to answer? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing opened. The air was tight. The war wasn't declared, but it had already begun. The Capitol's hearing chamber had seen generations of conflict, some whispered, others screamed. Today, it was both. From the outside, it looked like another dry meeting of the House Oversight Committee. But inside, the tension crackled like an exposed wire. The agenda on paper was simple, a debate on the federal budget for racial equity programs in public education. But everyone in the room knew better. This wasn't about budget lines or policy briefs. It was about which version of America would be allowed to survive in the classroom. At one end of the dais, Representative Nancy Mace sat with the poise of someone used to being on camera. Her folder was crisp, color-coded, and carefully placed beside a chilled bottle of water. She wore a white blazer, spotless. The visual contrast wasn't accidental. She had built her brand on walking the line, sharp enough to jab, polished enough to deflect the backlash. The moment the gavel struck, she leaned into the mic with surgical precision and spoke like a scalpel carving into soft tissue. "Let me be clear," she began, her voice clipped, confident, and calculated. "What's being sold to our children as progress is actually poison. Critical race theory doesn't teach facts. It teaches resentment. It doesn't promote unity. It plants division. It tells white children they're born to oppress and black children they're doomed to be oppressed. That is not education. That is not America." A few murmurs of agreement echoed from her side of the aisle. The camera light turned red. She wasn't just talking to the committee. She was talking to voters, to talk show producers, to history itself, trying to rewrite it. Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She sat 2 chairs down, legs crossed, pen idle, lips pressed into a flat line. Where Mace looked curated, Crockett looked carved from conviction. A daughter of the South, a civil rights attorney turned congresswoman, her hair was braided back tight, her expression tighter. Every inch of her posture said, "I've been through more than this room can throw at me." But her stillness wasn't passivity. It was pressure, coiled and waiting. Mace reached for a printed handout highlighted in red and held it up like a courtroom exhibit. "This," she snapped, "was found in a middle school curriculum funded with federal equity dollars. It teaches that capitalism was built on slavery, that police disproportionately target minorities, and that America's founding documents are rooted in white supremacy." She paused. "This is a taxpayer-funded guilt trip designed to shame white children for things they didn't do." Another pause, this one longer, deliberate. "Let me ask the committee, when did education stop being about math and science and become a platform to punish kids based on the color of their skin?" She let the words hang, knowing they would land exactly where she intended. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink, but inside, something flared, not rage, not yet, something deeper, something older. It wasn't just the lie that stung. It was the ease with which it was spoken, the comfort, the confidence, the certainty in Mace's voice that her words would be met with nods, not consequences. That was privilege. That was the stage on which this entire hearing was being performed. Jasmine leaned back slightly, arms still crossed, eyes fixed on the woman across from her. She'd seen this play out too many times before, in courtrooms, in faculty meetings, in Sunday school curriculum debates. And always, the script was the same: erase the pain, protect the pride. Mace continued, her voice rising like a closing argument sharpened by polls, not principle. If we really care about kids, black, white, or otherwise, then we need to stop teaching them that America is broken. We need to teach them to rise, not to resent. We need to stop spending federal dollars on lessons that divide us by race and start investing in what unites us. Another wave of polite applause came from her side. Her smile was subtle, confident. She believed she had just won the room. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't clapping. She wasn't even blinking. Because when someone builds a platform on revisionist history, all it takes is one voice armed with truth to burn the whole thing down. Just when the room thought Mace had finished, just as pens dropped and shoulders began to settle, she leaned forward slightly, smiling, and delivered the line that would detonate everything. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her words landed like a coded missile wrapped in calm. You people always act like America owes you something. Maybe if you stopped blaming white privilege and started working harder, we wouldn't be in this mess. There it was, not just a dog whistle, a full siren. The chamber stilled. The shuffling stopped. The oxygen left the room, and something colder took its place. Jasmine didn't flinch, but her pen stopped. Her spine straightened. Her eyes rose from the yellow pad like a storm breaking the surface. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low and dangerously steady. "Did you just say, you people?" No gasps, just a ricochet of glances, aide to aide, staffer to staffer. Everyone knew they had crossed into dangerous ground. Mace didn't retreat, didn't rephrase. She smiled, shrugged, then doubled down. "That's right. You people are always causing trouble." A pen dropped. A chair creaked. A congressional aide sucked air through his teeth. The chairwoman didn't speak, but her glance toward the Democratic bench said it all, "Brace yourselves." But Jasmine didn't react. She absorbed. This wasn't silence, it was prelude, the kind of pause before the crack of thunder. Jasmine's eyes didn't blink. She stared straight at Mace, her hands still neatly folded. But there was something seismic happening behind her calm, not anger, memory. The kind of memory that doesn't fade with time, only burrows deeper. The memory of being followed in stores, of hearing locks click as she walked past cars, of being told to smile more in meetings, of being told she was so articulate, like it was a surprise, of being told, "You people," for years, just never on camera, never in Congress. And then she spoke. No trembling, no fire, just steel. "If my people are always causing trouble, Congresswoman, then why are we always the ones getting handcuffed, denied, undervalued, and underpaid?" She didn't yell it, she measured it, like a blade being drawn an inch at a time, each word sharper than the last. The room didn't erupt, it froze. Mace sat back, unsure whether to interrupt or ignore. But there was no ignoring what had just been said, not when it carried generations of withheld fury behind its restraint. No one moved. No one whispered. No one dared even check their phones. The moment was balancing on a razor's edge, and everyone in the room knew it. Because Jasmine Crockett hadn't just answered a slur. She had turned it into a mirror and made the whole room look. The silence was still hanging like a blade in the air when Jasmine moved, not abruptly, not theatrically, but with the deliberate grace of someone who had been here before. Her hand slid from the pad to the desk. The pen made a faint clicking sound as it touched the wood. She didn't look down. She didn't even breathe differently. She just let the weight of that moment settle and then cracked it open. Her voice was steady, low, precise. It didn't tremble, and it didn't need volume to land like thunder. "I think it's time we stop pretending," she said, letting that sentence hang just long enough to make everyone stop blinking. "It's time to talk honestly about something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, something many of you say isn't real because you've never had to live with it." Her eyes didn't leave Mace's, but her words weren't for her anymore. They were for every room like this one. It's called privilege. The word dropped like a gavel. And the truth is, some people never have to see what others live through, not because it doesn't exist, but because it doesn't happen to them. No one moved. The air in the chamber shifted, lighter in some corners, heavier in others. Jasmine's voice never rose, but it coiled with power, like a storm whispering before it strikes. Privilege is when you can say something like, "You people," and not even realize what it means. It's thinking you're just telling the truth when really you're showing that you've never had to question your place in this country. She paused only for a heartbeat. So let's be honest. Let's talk about what happens when history's changed, when people feel guilty just for seeing the truth, and when being comfortable matters more than being fair. The silence didn't break because everyone in the room knew they weren't just listening to a response. They were watching someone speak a truth they couldn't ignore. Her voice didn't rise, but the truth in it did. There was no fire in her tone, no fury in her delivery, only something far more unsettling, calm certainty. And when the weight of her words finally landed, she didn't reach for outrage. She didn't raise her hands or her voice. Instead, she reached for something colder, something heavier, proof. Because feelings can be ignored, twisted, or dismissed. But facts expose the cracks that polite conversation hides. Facts don't care who's offended. Facts turn silence into guilt. And facts make cowards out of denial. Jasmine leaned forward, not to grandstand, but to strike with surgical clarity. Her movements were quiet, almost too quiet for how loud the room felt. She opened a slim folder resting in front of her and slid out a few pages with the precision of someone handling evidence at a crime scene. The paper didn't crinkle. Her hands didn't shake. Her tone didn't shift. But something in the atmosphere did, like the sound before a lightning strike. This wasn't a speech anymore. It was cross-examination. And the jury was the nation. "Let me start with school," she said, steady. A 14-year-old white student in Missouri brought a loaded handgun to school, not a rumor, not a toy, a real gun. He was suspended for 5 days. No charges filed. The principal said it was handled internally. No police, no record, no mug shot. She looked up, not to provoke, just to make sure they were listening. Then she turned the page, eyes never leaving the microphone. Now, a 12-year-old black student in Florida brought a plastic water gun to school, a toy. He was tackled by school security. The police were called. He was handcuffed in front of his classmates, shoved into the back of a cruiser. His mother was told he was now flagged in the juvenile justice system. The words dropped like stones, one after another, heavy, cold, brutally clear. Same country, different consequences. And for what? For the color of a child's skin. That's not discipline. That's a message. She paused, just enough for the truth to echo. Let's move to the job market. Another page turned. 2 resumes, same degree, same GPA, same internships, same work experience, but one name says Josh Miller, the other says Deshaun Williams. She let the names hang in the air like a challenge. Josh got a 46% callback rate. Deshaun, 14%. Not because he was less qualified, but because someone saw the name and made a decision before the interview ever happened. A longer silence this time. Even the ambient noise, the shifting in chairs, the tapping of pens, had stopped. Jasmine didn't slow down. She couldn't afford to. "And let's talk about housing," she said, sliding a final page to the top. A black family in Cincinnati had their home appraised at $110,000. They removed all the family photos, the African artwork, the books on black history. They asked a white friend to pretend to be the owner. The same house, the same neighborhood, the same furniture, the second appraisal, $160,000. She raised her eyes. That's a $50,000 difference for skin tone. It was no longer just quiet. It was tense, the kind of stillness that no one tries to break because, deep down, they know they're not ready for what comes next. Jasmine leaned in again, but this time her voice softened, not weak, just quieter, sharper. Privilege is when you can afford to believe this isn't real because it's never happened to you. She didn't need to yell it. That sentence was a mirror. It reflected everything. It's the ability to hear stories like these and still ask, are you sure it's about race? That question isn't curiosity. It's avoidance. It's comfort trying to rewrite reality. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She looked at the people in front of her. Elected officials, lawyers, teachers, staffers, people who had the power to pretend this wasn't systemic. You see, for some of you, racism is a topic, a theory, a discussion point. For us, it's daily life. And when we speak about it, we're told we're imagining things. Now, the silence wasn't awkward. It was thick, heavy, indicting. If you need more proof, I have it. But the truth is, you already know. And with that, she let the silence stand, not because she had nothing left to say, but because she had said what needed to be heard. But as Jasmine's final sentence cut through the room, sharp as bone, deep as history, not everyone was ready to sit with it. Especially not the one who had just been disarmed. Some truths don't just sting, they provoke. That's when Nancy Mace made her move. She shifted forward in her chair, like a fuse catching fire. Her voice jumped out, jagged and rushed, slicing across the tension like a dull blade. That's not fair. It was meant to stop the momentum, to regain control, to fracture the silence before it could settle too long in anyone's conscience. But her words barely made it past the second syllable before the chairwoman's gavel tapped once, sharp, final. Congresswoman Mace, you'll have your opportunity to respond. But right now, she said, eyes narrowed, it's Representative Crockett's time. A hush swept over the room, not relief, not submission, something closer to respect or maybe fear, not of Crockett, but of what might come next. Because no one had expected this black woman in a dark suit and calm eyes to take the hearing hostage without raising her voice once. But here she was, not just speaking, but commanding. Nancy Mace clenched her jaw and leaned back, visibly irritated, but said nothing. She folded her arms with the stiffness of someone who had just lost the air in their sails. The energy that had once flowed in her direction had turned. And now, all eyes were shifting. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply adjusted her mic a half-inch closer, took a breath that seemed to gather not just oxygen, but every insult, every dismissal, every time she had been talked over, belittled, or waved off in rooms like this. And then she leaned in because the floor was finally hers. And she knew exactly what to do with it. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to shout or point. All she needed was the truth, and she held it in her hands like evidence at a trial where the nation was the jury. Slowly, she pulled out a clean, stapled document. The pages didn't shake in her fingers because she wasn't nervous. She was focused, steady, a stillness that came not from calm, but from clarity, from years of carrying these numbers inside her, not just on paper, but in her bones. She laid the report gently on the table, turned it toward the committee, and spoke into the mic with the kind of precision that slices deeper than anger ever could. This is a report published by the U.S. Department of Justice last year. It's not a blog post. It's not an activist flyer. It's your government on record telling the story some of you refuse to hear. Her tone didn't accuse, it revealed, each word like a brick being removed from the wall of denial. It found that black Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans. That's not a feeling. That's not a theory. That's a statistic. And it's not new. She looked up, scanning the room, not for permission, but for accountability. Even when unarmed, even when not resisting, even when trying to run away, over and over again, the pattern is the same. One set of lives gets hesitation, the other gets bullets. She let that sit, not for drama, but because some truths need silence to sink in. Let's talk sentencing. Same crime, same substances, same criminal histories. But if you are a person of color, specifically Black or Latino, you will, on average, receive a sentence that is 30% longer than your white counterpart. She tapped the document lightly, not to emphasize, but to remind them this wasn't her opinion. It was the government's own admission. You can take race off the application, off the courtroom transcript, off the parole board paperwork, but somehow it still finds its way into the outcome. Now, the room was still, not respectfully, uncomfortably, like everyone knew they were hearing something they could no longer unhear. And here's what I need you to understand, she continued, her voice dropping just slightly, calmer, but heavier. White privilege doesn't mean white people never suffer. It doesn't mean your life has been easy. It doesn't mean you haven't earned what you have. She paused. And then came the sentence that seemed to shift the air in the room. White privilege isn't the privilege to never be wrong. It's the privilege to be forgiven when you are. Her words were clean, soft, but unrelenting, like water that wears down stone. It's the privilege of being seen as a person first, not a problem. It's getting a second chance, a benefit of the doubt, a soft voice instead of a raised weapon. A few staffers exchanged quiet looks. One aide near the back bit the inside of his cheek. Another scribbled something, then stopped halfway through. Jasmine kept going, slow, steady, lethal. Privilege is when a teenage white boy caught with pills is sent to rehab, but a black teenager with the same pills is sent to prison. It's when one parent gets told, let's help your son get back on track, and another gets told, your kid is a threat to public safety. Her hand rested on the document again, this time not to emphasize data, but to anchor herself in something unshakable. The numbers don't lie, but too often we pretend they don't matter because they don't hurt you, because they didn't happen to you. She looked around. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired, focused, worn by experience, but sharpened by purpose. White privilege is not the ability to do wrong. It's the ability to recover from it. It's the ability to survive it. It's the ability to be seen as human after you fail. And then she paused, not for applause, not for permission, just long enough to let the truth take root. The truth is, we all make mistakes, but only some of us get to come back from them. The silence that followed was heavier than before, not because of tension, but because of recognition. Because the facts were no longer just numbers on a page. They were a mirror, and everyone in the room was staring into their own reflection. She hadn't stormed out. She hadn't pointed fingers. She hadn't cried. But somehow, Jasmine Crockett had left the entire hearing chamber feeling like a fire had rolled through it, quietly, but completely. And what no one inside those marble walls fully understood at the time was this: they weren't the only ones who had heard her. Outside the Capitol, the world had been waiting. People were scrolling, clicking, tapping, hungry for something real. And when that clip hit the internet, just under 2 minutes, no edits, no spin, it detonated. Jasmine's voice, calm but sharp, was now everywhere. Her words, white privilege is not the privilege to be right. It's the privilege to be forgiven when you're wrong, didn't just trend. They echoed. They haunted. By the time the hearing adjourned, the video had already crossed 1 million views. The next morning, it was #1 on YouTube, not an ad, not a music video, a congressional hearing, raw, unfiltered, real. In a small-town office in Missouri, a long-haul truck driver named Kevin had just pulled into a diner, 14 hours on the road. He sat in his cab, engine off, window cracked, scrolling through his feed while sipping gas station coffee. He wasn't looking for politics, he usually skipped it. But something in the headline stopped him: Congresswoman drops truth on white privilege, silences the room. He clicked. He watched, then watched again. The words weren't angry, but they didn't flinch. They didn't let him look away. The statistics, the stories, the line about 2 resumes, one named Josh, one named Deshaun, hit him. He saw his own hiring decisions flash before him like a reel, and for the first time in years, he felt something move in his chest. He muttered, more to himself than anyone else, "I'm white. I never really thought about it before." He took a long sip of coffee, looked down at his phone, and added, quieter this time, "But I do now." In a high school classroom in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the day had started like any other. Desks creaked, backpacks dropped, students yawned. Ms. Dillard had planned to run a unit on the First Amendment, but something about that hearing wouldn't leave her mind. She pulled up YouTube, loaded the clip, connected the projector. "This is what real testimony looks like," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I want you to listen, not as students, as citizens." She hit play. The students didn't fidget. They didn't laugh. They listened. Jasmine's voice filled the room, not loud, but commanding. And when the clip ended, silence sat heavy in the classroom like fog. A boy near the back, 15 years old, black, lanky, quiet, raised his hand. He didn't look angry, just unsure. "If they call her, you people," he asked, "what do they call me?" The question didn't need an answer. It was the answer. Ms. Dillard swallowed hard. She had taught for 20 years and had never heard it put that way. She clicked the screen off, not to avoid the conversation, but to make room for it. In Georgia, a retired firefighter watched the clip on his back porch, sunlight catching in his glass of iced tea. 68, white, a veteran of more than one kind of fire, he had voted Republican all his life, served his community, raised his kids right. But he couldn't stop replaying Jasmine's words, "It's not about who suffers. It's about who survives their mistakes." That hit him hard. He thought about the kid in his neighborhood who shoplifted a candy bar and got locked up. He'd been black. The white kid who did the same, his parents got a warning. Boys will be boys, that's what they'd said. He remembered that now, clear as day. And it wasn't rage he felt, nor guilt, it was clarity. The kind of truth that doesn't scream but sinks into your chest and stays there. He picked up his phone, typed a message to his son, "Watch this. You need to see this." We all do. Across the country, in kitchens, laundromats, staff rooms, waiting rooms, the clip kept playing, over and over again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but people leaned in when it played, like they didn't want to miss a word. In Detroit, a mother watching during her break between shifts texted her sister, "She said what we've been saying for years, only now they're finally hearing it." In Boise, Idaho, a school counselor cried quietly at her desk. In New York, a subway musician played a melody and whispered Jasmine's name between sets. The clip had gone beyond viral. It had gone personal. And the most extraordinary part? Jasmine didn't know. Not yet. She was still in her office, phone buzzing off the hook. Her team tried to keep up with the flood, emails, voicemails, messages. Some were angry, a few were threats, but most were just this: "Thank you. Thank you for saying it. Thank you for not blinking. Thank you for not shouting, but also not backing down." And so the ripple moved, not like a wave crashing, but like a pulse, steady and unstoppable. One person at a time, one mind changed, one blind spot exposed, one heart cracked open, not by force, but by truth. The country had moved, shifted, not with earthquakes or riots, but with something quieter and, in many ways, more permanent: recognition. But as America leaned in to reckon with what had been said, one voice, the one who lit the match, had gone quiet. For 7 days, Nancy Mace said nothing. Not a tweet, not a press release, not a morning show appearance. Her team fielded calls with generic statements, "No comment at this time. Congresswoman Mace is focusing on legislative priorities. We'll respond when appropriate." But the silence wasn't strategy. It was retreat. Outside her office in South Carolina, a row of reporters had camped out on the sidewalk, their cameras humming in the thick southern air. Microphones were raised every time she passed by. Her team shuffled her quickly into cars, elevators, private doors. And yet, every time, someone asked the same question, and it hung in the air longer than the woman who refused to answer it. Congresswoman Mace, do you regret saying, "you people"? Some asked gently, some shouted. One reporter, an older black woman from Charleston, simply held up a printed quote and asked, "Do you still stand by these words?" But Mace never stopped, never paused. She didn't answer. She didn't have to, because the silence was doing it for her. Behind the scenes, her allies were scrambling. Some tried to excuse the phrase, "she didn't mean it that way." It was taken out of context. Others shifted blame, "This is just political theater. Critical race theory is the real issue." But none of it landed, because no spin could drown out the one sound that now defined her week, Jasmine Crockett's voice, and the echo of a room that went dead silent after 3 words. Inside the Capitol, the tension lingered. Colleagues passed Mace with polite nods, but not many lingered. Some openly avoided her. One staffer whispered, "She's radioactive now." Even her supporters were on edge, not because they didn't agree with her politics, but because she had lost control of the story. And Jasmine? Jasmine said nothing. No interviews, no victory lap, no headline-grabbing rebuttals. Her phone was full, colleagues, celebrities, activists, strangers, all asking for another quote, another strike. But she didn't give them one. Instead, she posted a single photo, black and white, grainy but sharp, no caption. It showed Jasmine standing in the center of the hearing room, back straight, hands calm at her sides, eyes locked with the camera like it was a witness she didn't trust but dared not flinch from. The angle was low, the lighting unflattering, the emotion raw. Behind her, blurred in shadows, were the outlines of the committee, some listening, some turning away, one leaning back with her arms crossed, Mace. The image went viral in under an hour. By nightfall, it had become an icon. Some called it the stare heard round the world, others, the silence that spoke. On Reddit, someone wrote, "She didn't have to say anything. This photo is the statement." And maybe that's what made it powerful. Jasmine had spoken every necessary word inside that room. Outside it, she didn't need to chase the noise. She let the noise chase her. Meanwhile, Nancy Mace watched the world change from behind her office blinds. The clip wouldn't stop playing. Even when she turned the volume down, it was still there, on the hallway TVs, on the phones of her interns, in the elevator conversations. She could feel it like a second heartbeat. Each time Jasmine spoke, measured, calm, surgical, it reminded Mace of the moment she lost the room. And not just the room, the country. One morning, she stared at her phone screen, thumb hovering over a draft tweet, "I was misunderstood. I never meant to offend." She deleted it, tried another, being targeted by a political machine. That didn't sit right either, because deep down, she knew it wasn't her words that were twisted. It was the silence that followed them. Outside her district office, protesters began to gather, not angry mobs, not screaming crowds, just people. Some held signs quoting Jasmine. Others held mirrors with the words, "Look again," written in thick black marker. She'd underestimated what one woman could do with facts, a steady voice, and a single moment of unflinching presence. And Jasmine? Still no comment, still no follow-up, still no press junket or CNN appearance, just that photo. And somehow, it was louder than anything either of them had ever said. She hadn't said a word to the media, no sound bites, no interviews, no spin. But that black and white photo had done something most politicians' speeches never could. It held a mirror up to the nation. Days later, Jasmine Crockett wasn't standing in front of a committee or a camera. She was standing in front of the people, her people, in a packed community center in Dallas. The air felt heavier than usual, not because of heat, but because everyone in that room knew something had changed. Jasmine hadn't just made a point. She'd drawn a line. And tonight, everyone had come to see which side of it they stood on. The room was full before the sun even touched the horizon. Folding chairs packed elbow to elbow, rows stretching all the way to the back wall where volunteers had propped open the emergency exits to let in whatever breeze they could find. Retired teachers, high school students, single parents with toddlers on their laps, church deacons, deli workers, veterans with weathered caps, some wore shirts that read, "Truth isn't divisive, it's just uncomfortable." Others held homemade signs that said simply, "We hear you." Jasmine stood just behind the curtain, staring down at the floor for a moment, her breath steady, her hands loose at her sides. No podium tonight, no script, just a microphone, a community, and a story that had already lit a fire across the country. Now it was time to bring it home. When she stepped onto the stage, the room rose, not in loud, celebratory applause, but in something deeper, respect, recognition. A standing silence broken only by a few claps that slowly grew until the space filled with a warmth that was louder than cheers. Jasmine didn't wave. She didn't smile. She stood there for a moment, just breathing, just looking. Then she took the mic in both hands like it was something sacred. When she spoke, her voice didn't echo. It wrapped around the room like a thread pulling everyone a little closer. "I didn't come here tonight to go viral," she began, her voice calm and low. "I didn't come here to trend or to clap back or to collect likes." The room stayed silent but leaned in. You could feel bodies shift, hearts open, chairs creak. "I came here to speak plain, and sometimes plain talk cuts deeper than speeches ever could." She gestured toward the back wall where the projector had frozen the now famous image of her in the hearing room, eyes locked forward, unflinching, unmoved. "They said I didn't respond, but that was my response, because sometimes the strongest thing a black woman can do is stand still and not blink." A few people clapped. Others nodded, but most just listened. Jasmine wasn't finished. "What I said in that room wasn't radical. It was reality. It wasn't new. It's been whispered at kitchen tables, in church basements, over the phone after someone got pulled over again. What made it different this time was that somebody finally heard it outside the neighborhood." She paused, not for effect, but for air. The weight of this wasn't rehearsed. It was lived. "And now I want to say something else, something I need to say, not to Congress, but to you." The mic crackled slightly as she stepped closer to the front of the stage. She didn't raise her voice, but she didn't need to. Every word came out clear and cutting. America doesn't need to apologize for having white privilege, but it does need to see it. It needs to name it. And it needs to decide if we're brave enough to move past it together. That line landed like thunder, soft, but shaking the floor beneath people's feet. Privilege isn't just about money or power. It's about who gets the benefit of the doubt, who gets to be seen as complicated instead of dangerous, who gets another shot when they mess up, and who gets erased. Her tone shifted slightly now, more force behind it, not anger, urgency. "I'm not asking anyone to carry guilt. I'm asking you to carry truth. Because if we keep flinching every time someone names what's broken, we'll never fix a damn thing." In the second row, a woman gripped her husband's hand. In the back, a man in his 70s wiped his cheek without drawing attention. No one looked away, not from Jasmine, not from themselves. We say this country is a place of second chances. That's what we teach. That's what we sell. But what kind of second chance is it when only certain people are allowed to make the first mistake? Jasmine let the silence answer for her. Then she delivered the line that would follow her forever: "We don't need shame. We need vision. We don't need more denial. We need more courage. And we sure as hell don't need to keep pretending that we all start from the same place when the finish line keeps moving." The room didn't move, didn't breathe. It was the kind of moment that presses itself into the walls, into people's bones. A woman in the back started clapping. Then a man near the center stood. Then two more. And then it was everyone. Folding chairs scraped back. People rose, not for applause, for acknowledgement, for alignment, for something deeper than agreement. Jasmine didn't raise her hands. She just stood there, hands still on the mic, eyes still forward. You don't fix a thing by ignoring it. You fix it by seeing it, by saying its name, and by deciding, not someday, not next election, but right now, what kind of country we want to be. The applause didn't explode. It built like water rising behind a dam that had finally cracked. People clapped, not because they were moved, but because they were changed. And in that sound, Jasmine Crockett didn't hear celebration. She heard readiness. By the time the applause had faded from the walls of the Dallas Community Center, the rest of the country was already reacting. Jasmine Crockett's words, delivered without a single teleprompter or soundbite rehearsal, had done what months of campaign slogans could not. They pierced through the static of American politics. Her voice didn't just trend. It fractured the timeline. Within hours, her quote was clipped, captioned, subtitled, reposted, debated, and dissected. By morning, the video of her saying, "America doesn't need to apologize for white privilege. It needs to see it, name it, and move past it together," had hit every major news cycle across the political spectrum. Cable news anchors couldn't stop playing it. On progressive platforms, her words were called the most honest thing a sitting lawmaker had said in years. On conservative outlets, her name was flashed across screens with caution tape graphics and panicked commentary. Within 24 hours, the noise had turned into a tidal wave. Hashtag #StandWithCrockett exploded on Twitter. So did hashtag #PrivilegeIsReal and hashtag YouPeopleHurtUs. But so did hashtags of another kind, hashtag #RaceHustler, hashtag #DivisionPolitics, hashtag #StopCrockett. In the war rooms of news networks, producers scrambled to book her. Everyone wanted an exclusive, a live reaction, a panel debate. But Jasmine wasn't answering calls. Her team issued a simple press statement: "Representative Crockett has said what she needed to say. The country is listening now." It was the kind of refusal that only fanned the flames, because the media machine doesn't like silence, especially when it comes from a black woman who had just stolen the national conversation without raising her voice. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the backlash grew sharp. Senator Hastings, a firebrand conservative from Wyoming, appeared on primetime radio within hours of the clip reaching national reach. "This kind of rhetoric is dangerous," he growled into the microphone. "This isn't unity. It's shame wrapped in a soundbite. Congresswoman Crockett isn't trying to heal America. She's trying to divide it with guilt politics." He wasn't alone. One representative introduced a symbolic censure resolution, calling her remarks inflammatory and inappropriate for the dignity of the chamber. Another suggested her speech was borderline un-American. Talk show hosts began painting her as a radical. "She wants white kids to grow up hating themselves," one segment said, flashing clips of her face in black and white, her quote edited just enough to change its meaning. The usual suspects did what they always do: distort, distract, attack. But even as the arrows flew, something else was happening. Quieter, but stronger. In classrooms from Baltimore to Boise, teachers began opening up conversations they'd previously avoided. One AP history teacher printed out Jasmine's full remarks and used them as the week's critical thinking assignment. "We don't all have to agree," she told her class. "But we do have to listen." In a library in rural Nebraska, a volunteer group of parents started a weekly discussion circle using Crockett's speech as the first reading. One mother said it gave her the words to explain to her kids what she never had the language for. Meanwhile, in churches, union halls, and community centers, small groups began to form around a single question: why did this speech feel so different? Maybe it was the delivery, quiet but certain. Maybe it was the data she shared, undeniable and unspun. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because Jasmine didn't ask for anything. She didn't demand an apology or beg for attention. She simply said, "See it. Name it. Move past it together. It wasn't a grievance. It was a blueprint. And yet, for every town hall that played her video, there was a news host mocking it. For every teacher who brought it into their classroom, there was a school board member calling it divisive. Some donors began pulling money from organizations that promoted the clip. A PAC that had once courted Jasmine quietly dropped her from their speaking roster. One political action committee labeled her a risk to moderate support in swing states. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't calculate, was that Jasmine hadn't spoken for political gain. She hadn't done it for ratings or polls. She spoke because she had lived it. Because in every hearing she sat through, in every article she was misquoted in every room where she was talked over, she knew the silence was just as dangerous as the lie. On social media, the battle raged. Supporters flooded her pages with messages of thanks, courage, solidarity, veterans, nurses, farmers, students. Many simply wrote, "You spoke for me." But buried among them were the threats, the venom, the ugliness that always shows up when truth rattles too many cages. One anonymous message read, "Keep talking like that, and we'll make sure you regret it." Her team reported it to the FBI. At CNN headquarters, producers debated whether to do a full segment on the Crockett moment. Some argued it would give her a bigger platform than she deserved. Others said the country needed it. The compromise came in the form of a Sunday feature titled, "Crockett's Conscience and the Country's Dividing Line." The reporter asked a question mid-broadcast that echoed across living rooms: is this just another viral moment, or is it a turning point? That night, late in Texas, Jasmine sat alone in her kitchen. She wasn't watching coverage. She was watching her mother's old watch tick on the wall. Her phone buzzed beside her, screen lighting up with another interview request. She let it ring. The arrows had come, as expected. But so had the echoes. And while noise fades, truth stays. Across America, something had shifted, not because of a law passed or a vote cast, but because one woman had spoken clearly enough to cut through the static. And now the country had to decide whether to hear it or retreat once more into the comfort of forgetting. The lights in the office flickered once before settling into a dull, warm hum. Most of the staff had left hours ago. The receptionist's desk sat empty, her mug still half full. Jasmine hadn't moved in 30 minutes. She was sitting on the edge of the window ledge in her DC office, shoes off, her heels tucked underneath her in a posture that seemed more like a defense than a stretch. From this high up, the Capitol dome looked almost peaceful, glowing under the pale wash of midnight light. But Jasmine knew better. The building was quiet, but it wasn't at rest, not really, not ever. The TV on the wall was muted. Headlines scrolled silently across the screen: Crockett sparks firestorm after town hall statement, white privilege, viral or volatile. You people, the phrase that split a nation. She didn't look at the screen anymore. She'd already memorized the cadence of media spin, the inflection always the same, like the voiceover on a true crime series, part concern, part suspicion, never full humanity. The applause from earlier that night had long since faded. The hugs, the thank yous, the "you gave us language" whispers, they were real, they were powerful, but they weren't permanent. Because once the moment passed, Jasmine knew what came next: silence, exhaustion, and the weight. It was always heavier at night, not because of fear, but because of the clarity that darkness forces. Alone, stripped of performance, stripped of armor, she could finally ask herself the question she never had time for when the cameras were on: what did I just risk? She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her blazer was draped over the arm of the chair. Her dress shirt was wrinkled slightly at the elbows. One cuff still had foundation smeared on it from earlier in the day when she'd wiped her cheek too fast between events. The air smelled faintly of printer toner and lemon sanitizer, cold, clinical, nothing warm about politics after dark. Her phone buzzed beside her. Again, another notification. She didn't look. She already knew it wouldn't be something new: more mentions, more press requests, more noise. But truth doesn't live in the noise. It lives in the questions you can't answer, the kind that wake you up at 3 a.m. and whisper, was it enough? Did it land? Or did I just make myself an easier target? She opened her inbox and skimmed past the usual chaos, subject lines in all caps, invitations to appear on panels, thank you letters from strangers. And then she saw it, a plain subject line from Ava J., age 13, Mississippi, you made me feel real. She clicked. Dear Congresswoman Crockett, I'm not sure if this is the right email, but I wanted to say thank you. I'm 13. I don't know a lot about politics, but I do know what it feels like to be looked through. I watched your speech. I didn't understand all of it, but when you said, you don't need shame. You need vision, I felt like someone saw me. For real. Thank you. Please don't stop. Jasmine read it twice, then a third time. She closed her laptop and leaned her forehead against the window glass. The cool surface pressed back, grounding her. In a city that measured worth in polls and headlines, one quiet message from a child in Mississippi had just become the most important thing she'd received all week. She remembered what her mother used to tell her in moments like this, you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to say something true enough to make them go silent. That had stayed with her for years. Tonight, it had come full circle. Still, truth had a price. It always did. Some people paid in silence, some in votes, others in security details. For Jasmine, the price was something harder to quantify, a kind of solitude that only the truth-tellers know, the loneliness that creeps in not when you speak, but when you wait to see who stays after you've said what needed to be said. She looked at the Capitol dome again. It looked closer now, somehow, not because the city had shrunk, but because Jasmine was finally standing where she'd always belonged, not as a guest in the chamber, not as a checkbox on a diversity spreadsheet, but as a voice that refused to shrink. Her staff had begged her to stay low after the viral storm. Let it cool, they'd said. Don't poke the bear. But what they didn't understand was that Jasmine wasn't trying to burn anything down. She was trying to light a path. She took another deep breath, pulled her legs out from under her, and let her feet touch the cold hardwood floor. The sound of her soles hitting the ground echoed faintly in the quiet room, grounding, final. She walked slowly to her desk, not rushed, not unsure, just heavy. She opened the drawer where she kept her notebooks, pulled one out, a legal pad with the top pages already filled with stats and citations. She flipped to the first blank sheet and began to write, not for a speech, not for the press, just for herself. She wrote, truth doesn't apologize. It doesn't beg. And it doesn't run. But the people who speak it, we bleed quietly in green rooms, in locked offices, on nights like this. She stopped writing, closed the pad. She didn't need to finish the sentence. She'd already said it all. The Capitol clock chimed outside her window. It was nearly 1 a.m. She grabbed her blazer, draped it over her arm, turned out the lights, and paused at the door. The world would be louder in the morning, but for now, for just a few minutes, there was stillness. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself feel it. 3 months had passed since the hearing, since the town hall, since the storm. The headlines had quieted, as they always do. The panels stopped debating. The hashtags faded. But somewhere underneath the country's roaring political cycle, something quieter had taken root. And now, like spring breaking through winter's crust, the first signs were finally showing. Jasmine Crockett stood in the back of a small library in rural Virginia, watching rows of teenagers shuffle into mismatched folding chairs. It wasn't a campaign stop. No cameras, no national press, just a group of high school students, black, white, Latino, wearing jeans, hoodies, varsity jackets. Some looked curious, a few looked skeptical, but all of them had come voluntarily for a community discussion on race and privilege. The invitation hadn't come from a nonprofit or a political group. It had come from a student council president named Kyle Whitmore, a white 17-year-old whose grandfather had helped build this very library. His email had been short: "We saw your speech. We've never had someone like you here. Some people said we shouldn't invite you. That's why we did." Jasmine didn't smile when she read it. She exhaled, because that's how it starts, not with applause, but with questions. And Kyle had asked the right one. She stepped to the front, no microphone, no dais, just her voice, the same one that had cracked a nation open on live television. But today, it was softer, not because it had weakened, but because it didn't need to fight to be heard. "You don't have to agree with me," she said, looking around the room. "But if you're willing to listen, really listen, then we've already done something most adults in Washington can't." Some students nodded. Others simply stared. She told them stories, not statistics, about her first courtroom win, about being mistaken for the defendant, about growing up in a neighborhood where sirens were more common than sunsets. And when she finished, Kyle raised his hand and asked, "Why do people say talking about this stuff is dangerous?" She paused, then answered, "Because truth shakes things, and people fear what they can't control." He nodded, writing it down like it was scripture. Meanwhile, in Kansas City, a police chief sat behind his desk, staring at a printout of Jasmine's remarks from the hearing, highlighted, underlined, annotated. He'd watched the clip in secret 3 times. The part that hit him hardest wasn't about policing. It was when she said, "Privilege isn't about who suffers. It's about who survives their mistakes." He thought about the last 3 internal review cases on use of force, thought about how differently they were handled. He picked up the phone. "Tell the board," he said to his deputy. "We're reviewing stop-and-frisk protocols, effective immediately." It wasn't policy reform, not yet, but it was movement. And it started with one line spoken into a microphone months ago by a woman they said was just trying to go viral. Back in Texas, Jasmine's office had changed, too, not in size or furniture, but in energy. Every week, her team now received handwritten letters, not just from her district, but from Wyoming, Alabama, Oregon, Vermont. Some were long and philosophical, others were one sentence: "You said what needed to be said." The most surprising came from a retired judge in Maine: "I was wrong for too many years. You reminded me how to be useful again." Her legislative inbox had changed, too. Proposals that once gathered dust were now gathering signatures. An education equity bill, a policing transparency clause, a community funding measure tied to zip code justice. They hadn't passed yet, but people were asking for her by name in committee meetings. That was new. In one closed-door session, a Republican lawmaker leaned over and whispered, "You scare the hell out of them, you know." Jasmine blinked. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because you don't flinch. But even change has its shadows." After one speech in Ohio, a group staged a walkout, accusing her of being anti-American. After another in Phoenix, someone left a noose made of twine on her car antenna. Security increased. So did the weight on her chest. One night, as she reviewed legislation alone in her office, she paused to look at that same photo from the hearing, the black and white one, her staring into the camera, still unblinking. That photo had traveled across the country. But now, it looked different. Back then, she had stood alone. Now, she didn't feel alone anymore. Because somewhere in Pennsylvania, a teacher had framed her words and hung them next to the Constitution. In Mississippi, a 13-year-old girl had started a school podcast called What We're Not Taught. And in Georgia, a pastor had changed the sermon from silence to action. The seeds were growing, not loudly, but deeply. One Sunday, Jasmine visited her mother's church in East Dallas. No press, no headlines, just home. After the service, an elderly woman approached her, her hands trembling slightly as she reached into her purse and pulled out a laminated card. "This," she said, handing it to Jasmine, "is what you gave me." It was a quote, her quote, you don't fix a thing by ignoring it. You fix it by seeing it, saying its name, and choosing together not to look away. Jasmine held the card in both hands. She didn't cry. She just nodded, because now she knew. The moment may have passed, but the movement had just begun. The movement had begun. Not with fireworks, not with legislation, but with something deeper. Jasmine had given the country more than a headline. She had given it a question. And long after the applause faded, that question still echoed, not, what should we do, but something harder, what kind of people are we if we look away? Because that's the real lesson, isn't it? That injustice isn't always a monster in the street. Sometimes it wears a badge and a smile. Sometimes it wears silence like armor and calls it objectivity. Sometimes it looks you in the eye, calls you, you people, and dares you to flinch. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, but don't mistake that for immunity. She carried every stare, every doubt, every whisper that said she didn't belong, that her facts were feelings, that her pain was politics. And still, she stood. She didn't ask to be a symbol. She didn't ask to carry the weight of a country's denial on her shoulders. But when the moment came, she didn't run. She didn't soften her voice to make power comfortable. She didn't round her edges to make injustice easier to swallow. She told the truth, not the kind that gets applause, but the kind that demands consequences. And she paid them, quietly, fully, alone. And maybe that's the point. The greatest courage isn't in the roar of crowds. It's in the quiet after, the kind of silence that presses down like gravity. Because after the headlines vanish, after the cameras pack up, what's left is the price, not just the threats, not just the isolation, but the knowledge that truth-telling is not a performance. It's a burden, one that rarely comes with thanks. But here's what matters, she didn't lift that burden for herself. She lifted it so others could see it, so that a student in Oklahoma could ask, what do they call me? So that a truck driver in Missouri could say, now I see it. So that a country built on forgetting could remember itself long enough to feel something true again. And what Jasmine taught us, what this story reveals in all its fire and stillness, is that the real fight isn't between parties. It's not between left and right. It's between those who are willing to look in the mirror and those who are not. White privilege, 2 words enough to shake a chamber of power to its core, not because it accuses, but because it exposes. And what makes it so dangerous is not that it's false. It's that it's so undeniably real. Because privilege isn't about ease. It's about insulation. It's not about the absence of suffering. It's about the presence of grace, of benefit, of forgiveness where others receive judgment. And the only reason that truth stings is because, deep down, we already knew it. So, what do we take from this? That courage looks different when it's not selling anything. That justice doesn't always wear a robe. It sometimes wears exhaustion and stubborn resolve. That the next Jasmine Crockett might be watching from the back of a classroom, wondering if anyone will believe her when she says, this happened to me, too. And the answer to that question depends on us. Because the real ending to this story isn't written by the one who stood at the microphone. It's written by the ones who heard her and decided what to do next. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.